Hey everybody, it's me, Benito Garcia from Go RPGs Presents The Most Rad Nerd, and I'm so stoked to have Ahmnestria on the show again. My nerd PIC, who's super busy on Twitch, sounds like.
Yeah, it's been really fun so far.
What have you been playing? What's been your favorite game so far?
We've been really into Apex Legends this last like two and a half weeks.
And then how about your RPG stuff, your D&D stuff? Still doing some Twitch there?
Yeah, we're still doing it on Wednesdays, but this Wednesday's our last campaign for that one for a little bit. So
yeah. And then what? Then a breather, or are you gonna pick?
Yeah, so we're on the final boss fight, and then we're gonna roll all new characters.
Oh wow! No kidding. You're not gonna just carry them on. You're just gonna let's do some new ones.
Well, I mean, they're high level. They're kind of at the end of their stories.
I gotcha. So it's time to retire with their riches and scatter to the winds.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. Yeah, we're still doing all of ours every Wednesday. Every other Wednesday is 2 different groups, and that's been going really well. It's been fun. And we have a special guest tonight, and I am so excited to have this person on. Shrouded in mystery. So I can't wait to get to that part. But we should talk about Synergy Nation Network, I suppose. So head over to Synergy Nation Network and check out all of the really cool podcasts over there. I'm very lucky to be a part of that and be able to bring all of the cool videos and the interviews and the super nerdy stuff that I like to do. So we should head over there real quick and let's take a look at Synergy Nation, see what's going on. Anybody that's on that network has so much passion about their shows, and there's so many really, really good shows. Oh, look what's on top. Go RPG Presents Weird.
It's got my name on it.
That's right. You were in on that one. We talked about annoying character traits when you want to murder somebody, either in real life or their character because they're just annoying. Tons of great shows. If you go to the homepage, you can scroll down and you can see all of the new shows as they come up. Some really, really cool shows. And there's anything that you're interested in is on the network. There is After the Credits, Meisenplastered, which is a really interesting podcast about the food industry and the server industry. I know it sounds a little weird, but when you listen, it's very, very compelling. It's a great show. Actually, they had talked to me about coming on. I've got some busboy stories from when I was 15, and I got all my other 15-year-old skater buddies to work at this restaurant as busboys, so you can just imagine. The Weekly Geekly, very much the flagship of the network. They cover everything from movies to video games to comic books to TV shows. Pretty much everything that is pop culture for sure. Let's see, there's the Galactic Driftwood podcast. They cover a lot of different things too, but it's more of a sci-fi genre. They do some horror movie stuff if I can convince them to put that on the docket and invite me on their show. Go RPGs, as you can see, which is, again, the best show on there. Just ask anybody. Talk Comics to Me, Dr. Ravenwood, Between the Cheeks, and Thoughts and Shots. A lot of really, really cool shows on the network. So head over that way. There will be a link at the end of this. You were going to do some TikToks we talked about. Some cool videos.
I have a TikTok. It's as far as I've gotten. I'll make some content.
That's the quickest way, I'm telling you. It's the fastest way to get people to follow you because TikTok's the thing right now. All the kids are doing it, Heather. Okay, Ahmnestria, you are on Twitch, so we got to make sure that we get a bunch of people over there. And how's the best way to do that? To look up?
Easy. It's twitch.tv/Ahmnestria at the bottom there.
Look up Ahmnestria, and you will see all of her cool stuff. You have a schedule up there, I assume, when you're up and doing things and upcoming events.
The schedule's more or less in the Discord because I can more easily interact with everybody and say I was planning on streaming, but something came up. I post it in the Discord.
All right. Well, let's get them on Discord. How do they do that?
You'll have to go to my Twitch and click the link to the Discord.
All right. Well, no, that's cool. That's good to know. All right. Awesome. Well, we have talked enough about ourselves, we should move on to the topic. Did you get excited when I told you what I wanted to do?
Yes, and then I started reading. I was like, oh man, this is a lot deeper than I thought it was going to be.
And our mystery guest, Mr. X, who we keep his name secret because of he just knows a lot. He knows everything about everything. And so it's best to hide his identity and his name for his own safety and protection. And he does the deepest dives into things. And when I was talking to him about that this show was going to be on the history of gaming dice, I don't know that I just mentioned it in passing, or maybe I had just brought it up that that's what the next one was going to be. And he opened up this rabbit hole for me to peek over the edge, and then he just kicked me in the ass and I fell into the rabbit hole. And there is so much more to these little dice than I could have ever possibly even imagined. So we're going to talk about the history of gaming dice, and then kind of how that even goes past what you think it would. Like I get that the regular 6-sided dice, I get that is, what do I want to say? I get that is a gaming thing. Like ever since I was a little kid, I can remember, all the board games and things that I played was with 6-sided dice, right? I'm sure you did too. Yeah. And then when all these other goofy shapes showed up, I literally thought they were designed just for Dungeons and Dragons or RPGs. At the time, the only thing I knew was Dungeons and Dragons, but I thought they were designed just for that.
I kind of did too, to start, because I had never seen the other dice up until Dungeons and Dragons.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we never played any other games that had them. So we are going to get into the history of that. So hold on to your shorts, because you're going down the rabbit hole with us.
Good thing I'm wearing shorts today. All right.
Good thing you're wearing shorts. All right. So let's talk about, I have so many notes everywhere. Like I'm going to be looking all over the place because there's so much to this just on my end. And then when we hand it over, it's just going to get even more crazy. So let's bring in Mr. X. And that's all you get to see. That's all we get to see of Mr. X. Are you there, Mr. X?
Greetings and salutations.
Man. All right, Mr. X. We're going to dive into the history of gaming dice. And I think, obviously, we want you to jump in with bits and pieces here. But I think the heavy lifting is going to come when we get to where these shapes actually come from. So let's start with really the history of games that include dice, or something that resembles a dice, or something that you have to throw. So it's a chance. You don't know what's going to happen. And the first thing that I ran across was 2 games, both from around Egypt, so the Middle East-ish. And the first one was Senate. And Senate goes all the way back 5,000 years ago. And so they didn't necessarily use dice when you think of the dice that we use today. They used sticks. And when you threw your sticks, however they landed, dictated how far you could move your game piece. And Senate means passing. And the idea was to move your pieces around the board. And you can see there's hieroglyphics on there. To move your pieces around the board and avoid hazards or things that are going to stop you and from beating the person you're playing against, your competitor. And so I'm not really sure what the rules are, but I know that you can get the game out there. They've reproduced it for regular consumption. Is that the right word? Mass consumption. Oh, Ahmnestria, you always look at me like that. Okay. So the next one that came along, which was, now I know everybody's going to have a different way to pronounce this. I just say your. Ahmnestria, does that look like your or
I was going to say but
of course you were, because
maybe it's just to go against you at this point. I don't know.
That's why I said, of course you're going to. Well, we could ask Mr. X. He seems to know a lot about a lot of things. Mr. X, How far off are we on the pronunciation?
I believe it is Ur.
Ur? Anyway, kind of the same thought on this game. It's a two-player strategy game. It's a race game. Players would race to move the pieces. Each player had 7 pieces off the end of the board. And what's really cool about this game is it's the first recorded D4 dice from 2600 BC.
That's insane.
Yeah, right? Isn't that crazy? Especially when we're talking that we thought game dice or dice that are that shape came about with the rise in Dungeons and Dragons in the very, very early 70s. And we missed it by, how many years did we miss that by?
4,000 some odd years.
All right, 4,000 years. So anyway, so that's what I came up with those two games as far as really the first the first games that involved dice-ish. So then we jump ahead to the first D20. Ahmnestria, any guesses?
I'm sure I'm wrong when I say I first knew about these dice in Dungeons and Dragons. And I'm
300 BC.
Yeah, I'm sure I'm wrong.
Is that what you weren't going to say 300 BC?
That was my second guess, actually. So.
Oh man, you should have went with your second guess.
Yeah.
So the deal with dice too, very early on, was there was no. What do I want to say? The development of the Arabic numbers. So they had symbols on them, or they're called pips, which was just the little dot, like on a 6-sided dice. The little dots are called pips. And so since numbers hadn't been around yet, numbers aren't even on the dice yet. In the 11th century, and I got a really cool chart I'm going to bring up here in a little bit, but in the 11th century, dice really exploded and everybody was able to get their hands on them because of a game that had been invented that was called Hazard. And everybody played Hazard. Rich people, royalty played Hazard. Poor people, peasants played Hazard. And as a matter of fact, it's recorded that the game was played on the Mayflower when it was making its journey over here.
What is this game? Do we know the rules of this game?
Yeah, I'm getting there. Check this out. So, again, like I said, this rabbit hole is crazy. So Hazard is the precursor to the game of craps. So what happened was, once the United States was formed, however you want to say it, the French had a very big influence in the New Orleans area. And they were really big into playing this game Hazard. They called it crabs with a B. The thing you never want to get. They called it crabs. And the reason they called it crabs is because it was the worst dice roll that you could get. And it was the roll of 2. So it's, 1-on-1 on each of the 6-sided dice. If you get a 1 on each, the lowest number you could roll is a 2. And so they called it crabs. And over time, crabs was changed to craps. And there's 2 schools of thought there. One is the name craps came because when it came up, you yelled crap. And then there is a history of the slaves used to play the game as well. And somehow it's been told through time that the name craps came from that as well, from the slaves. Nobody really knows for sure, but now we know and enjoy craps. All right, so there's a huge history of gaming with dice. So this goes back quite a ways. It goes back to 1904. It's the first 10-sided dice. And what's funny about that is that the 10-sided dice wasn't even a part of was it not even a part of Dungeons and Dragons in the beginning? I don't think it was part of the set. I think it was introduced later. Is that right, Mr. X?
That is correct. I mean, that's 118 years ago.
Right.
It's just the first patent for that die.
Right. 1913, H.G. Wells publishes Little Wars, a set of rules for playing with miniature infantry, cavalry, and artillery. So kind of the birthplace of Dungeons and Dragons, actually. when they're Dungeons and Dragons really started from these war games where guys would have all their really cool painted little minis and terrain, and they would pit armies against each other, reenacting these famous battles from history. 1950 through 1961, we got a pretty good jump there. Icosahedron dice, numbered 0 through 9 twice, is invented by Yasushi Ishida and distributed by the Japanese Standard Association. I'm almost 100% sure that set of dice was in competition, or at least part of that first set that had come out with Dungeons and Dragons. When I say in competition, later on, the creators of Dungeons and Dragons decided to come up with their own dice based on those, and then there was quite a dice war that had gone on for quite a while. 1963, dice game with a tetrahedron die is filed by Frida F. S. Saeve. It includes 5 platonic solids, and an icosahedron numbered 1 through 20.
You know, what was fascinating to me was how far back they went into games and how some of this stuff wasn't even gaming related. It was, for instance, the D20 that was made by Mr. Yasushi, that was actually marketed and distributed as a way of demonstrating the principles of statistical quality control. So there were things that were repurposed and brought together, even though these polyhedra have been around since antiquity. For them to have been gathered together and implemented into the games as we know today is quite fascinating.
Yeah, and it seems like too those dice, they came in a clear, package, plastic disc package. They weren't even supposed to come out of the thing. Didn't you just shake them in the container?
I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. I think the idea was that they weren't supposed to come out of the case. That's how that worked. After I'd done some research and watched some videos on that. Where are we up to? 1968. David Weasley creates Braunstein, which introduces the concept of a game master and playing an individual character instead of faceless army units. August 1969, Gary Gygax and David Arneson. I'm struggling today. Heather, maybe you should take over with the names because you got the one right.
That means nothing.
Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson meet at Gen Con, and Gary gives him a draft of his chainmail game, the predecessor, the holy grail of Dungeons and Dragons was chainmail. 1971, Gary Gygax and Jeff Perrin published Chainmail, and Dave Arneson create Blackmore together. These games have most of the concepts which would be the foundation for Dungeons and Dragons. November 1972. Why has everybody got such weird names in this? McGarry and Arneson drives to Lake Geneva through a snowstorm to demo Blackmore for Gary Gygax. Mostly it was Arneson's rolling the 6-sided die behind his binder. All right, 1972, Don Lowry is one of the first American suppliers of the 5 platonic die set for his game Tactics. So what are we missing out of that? We are missing the 10-sided dice. January 1974. I was 4 years old in 1974.
I wasn't born.
You weren't born yet?
I was 1.
Mr. X, he may not tell us. Mr. X?
I was 1 year old.
1 year old. 1974. Dungeons and Dragons is published for the first time. The blue box edition of D&D includes a 5-piece platonic solid dice set. I'd really like to get that set at some time in my life. That would be fantastic. Of those first games. 1979. So there was a dice shortage, and TSR experienced it the worst out of everybody. The shortage included all of the plastic dice that had come with the sets. They couldn't find anything anywhere. They had to go back and mass produce these dice. But in the meantime, you got numbered cutouts that were on cardboard chits, and they were used in place of dice, along with a coupon for ordering dice from TSR. So what you'd do is you'd punch out all of these numbers, and then you'd put them in a bag. You'd reach your hand in the bag and pull it out, and that was your dice roll. All right, meet a real 10. November 1980, Game Science advertises their new invention, the D10, which is what is that? How do you pronounce that, Mr. X? Truncated? Truncated pentagonal trapezoid. You're just going to have to say it, Mr. X. This is up your alley, not mine.
Trapezohedron. Trapezohedron.
Zohedron. I can see why we just called it a D10 now. All right, 1981. Moldvay Basic Set. The magenta box includes a D10 for the first time. So you get all of your dice and that one extra. All right, 1985. I was 15.
Still wasn't born.
You still weren't born yet. We're still
was not born.
Still hanging out, just waiting to come down and hang out with us.
Yeah.
All right, Mr. X, I'm just going to hand this over and let you read this one.
In 1985?
Yeah.
I would say that's the Zochihedron. D100 is released. Critics deride it as Zochi's golf ball. That
Right.
thing weighs a ton. It just keeps rolling, doesn't it?
I have one, and it does. It doesn't stop rolling. Really, the only time this thing stops rolling is when it bumps into something. Because it doesn't matter what you roll it on, it's not level. And it just goes and goes and goes until either it falls on the ground or it runs into something.
I'm wanting to get a D100. It's the only one I don't have right now.
All right. Moving on. March 1990. I'm getting up there. I was 20.
I still wasn't born.
Jeez.
Right?
That's terrible.
March 1990. Game Science introduces the Decade, or TM, the first D10 numbered 00 through 90. ChessX introduces their own version in August, both having developed it independent of one another. Sure they did. I don't buy that for a second.
Happened to come out around the same time.
I don't buy it for a second. January 1998. Michael Bowling filed a patent for crystal dice. And then it all changed from there. So that's kind of the history there. Yeah, I guess with Ahmnestria not even being born through most of that.
I existed in the very last one.
You're around
I was 7.
You're around for the crystal dice?
Yeah.
Did your very first set include, your very first game include, the standard 5 die?
I have the very first set. Right here.
Look at you.
Like, it's right down to the legit. Let me show you this.
My first set had everything but the D100.
So, let me look here. It did. So, it's this little goofy, these are like super hard colored plastics. This is the set. It came in all these little weird colors.
I remember that.
And this set does have, let's see, it's got a 12. Oh, you know what? It doesn't. I have a 6. I'm sorry. I have a 4, a 6, the 8, the 12, and the 20. I don't have the D10. I guess that makes it even more legit. All right.
The new D4s, they're rounded little, man, you could step on these and not take damage.
I think that's why they changed them. I think too many parents stepped on their kids' D4s and became handicapped for the rest of their lives. Those things are dangerous.
Those are the most painful dice. Like, I accidentally rested my arm on one time, not even stepping on it.
Yeah, like they are, I don't know how well you can see it in the picture. They are ridiculously sharp. And they don't roll worth beans.
Was that one of yours?
Check this out. Look how sharp this is. Like it cut it. It didn't just punch a hole in it. It literally cut it.
Who
yeah.
invented? I have questions about who actually invented that dice.
Oof. Yeah, what?
I have some questions about who actually invented that dice and who did they not like.
Right? Yeah, right. He hated his wife, so he invented the D4 and just scattered them on the and blamed his kids for it.
I think it's expert time.
Okay. So this is where the rabbit hole, I think this is really where it starts to get interesting. When you think about dice for gaming or gameplay, it's just, in the very beginning, they threw pebbles or they threw knuckle bones from animals because it was flat and it would flip over to one side or the other. Or whatever they had is what they used for dice and they use it for a game. But once you start getting into these shapes and where they actually come from, it's so far removed from gaming. It's two different things. They couldn't be more far apart, but they came together in the most perfect way for us to enjoy with gaming. So, Mr. X, I think we're going to hand it over to you and let you explain some of these shapes and how they work and where they come from.
These dice are what's known as platonic solids and have been known since antiquity. These 5 shapes are known as the platonic solids. They were first studied by the ancient Greeks around 360 BC, most notably by Plato, for whom they are named, and Theaetetus, who was the first to describe them mathematically. To keep it simple, there are 5, and these platonic solids are known as the tetrahedron, which is the red dice here, the 4-sided dice, the D4, the octahedron, which is the D8, the hexahedron, which is 6-sided, the icosahedron, the 20-sided, and the dodecahedron, which is the D12. There are only 5 regular polyhedra. That is, only 5 solids made from the same equilateral, equiangular polygons, which is, they are mathematically perfect forms. What makes these shapes so special is that the faces, angles, and edges are all congruent or identical in form, and that each one can fit perfectly inside a sphere with all of the corners touching. There are no other shapes in existence that can satisfy these parameters. They are ideal, perfect, and primal models. And so to the Greeks, and again, most notably by Plato, they symbolized fire, air, earth, water, and spirit or ether, respectively.
So I'm going to interrupt you real quick. See what I'm saying, Ahmnestria? Like, this is crazy to me when I think about my small brain thinking these were invented for Dungeons and Dragons, and it goes so far back from that. And what you're talking about, Mr. X, with these shapes, they didn't come up with these shapes to play games. Like, these shapes are very important to everything, gaming and whatnot, and whatever form these were used in games was such a throwaway thought so far down the line. I mean, these things have been around forever.
That's correct. Even the dice that you have that you showed earlier that was unearthed, that die basically it doesn't even have numbers on it. It was the numbering on that object used the first 20 letters of the Greek alphabet. And they didn't, nobody knows. Well, we obviously weren't there, but there's no record of it ever having been used to certainly roll for initiative or used for any kind of game of chance. So anyways, these platonic solids are considered by many to be like 5 sacred shapes that are believed to be the basis or origin of like everything in the world. Simply put, they are the building blocks over which both life and material things are constructed. So I was discussing with you how these 5 shapes are part of what's colloquially known as sacred geometry. Sacred geometry today is basically described as like a discipline or a field of knowledge which believes that fundamental properties of the universe were created according to geometrical laws, and it ascribes symbolic and sacred meanings to certain geometric shapes, patterns, proportions, and mathematical formulas. And the concept of sacred geometry is quite old, with some depictions dating back 6,000 years or more, which is proof that civilizations as old as like the Egyptians and the Mesopotamians were not only aware of the importance of these concepts and shapes and mathematical formulas to create these Platonic solids that you see here, but they implemented them in music, art, math, architecture, and so on. So it's believed that within the sacred geometry, the reality that we are aware of and exist within follows specific geometric plans, which are like revealed through geometric forms and patterns and ratios and frequencies. And again, these primal forms and the math behind them are present in everything from subatomic to the macroscopic, from trees and flowers to the structure of the human cell and DNA and language, arts, music. Everything can be traced back to one of the 5 Platonic solids, which is pretty nuts. They are cosmic patterns. There's cosmic patterns that indicate that the universe or the multiverse or the matrix or the holographic like reality that we are aware of is woven with a mathematical model. And just like the Matrix movie, the math and by extension geometry is the code. And that's why these patterns are sacred and why delving into them can help you see the unifying link that everything has with everything else that exists. These mathematical patterns and shapes tell us that and show us that basically all that you see around you or don't see is unified in one. What kind of blew my mind when I started getting into this in my early 20s, I was aware of having owned some of the first editions of Dungeons and Dragons in the 80s. I was aware later on in high school when I saw these shapes and learned of the Euclidean geometry and the Platonic geometry of these that came out, and I'm like, oh, I've seen these before, and it kind of stuck with me. And I remember it eventually led me to a book that I'll get to called The Ancient Secret of the Flower of Life by this guy named Drunvalo Melchizedek. There was some very interesting concepts with regards to the shape, and there was some history with regards to the math. And there was this symbol in that book that I had never seen before called the Flower of Life. It's known today as a flower. It's just a nickname given to it. Nobody really knows what this symbol, what it really is called. What we do know is that it can be found in literature, art, and architecture in every part of the world, from ancient times to the modern day world. So this flower of life, as it's called, is the name given to this geometric flower-like pattern. It consists of multiple, evenly spaced and overlapping circles around a central point. There are people that are still trying to make sense of it to this day. So anyways, as I was saying, this symbol can be found in literature, art, all over. There's the Forbidden City in China, the Temple of Osiris in Egypt, and the Golden Temple in India are some of the many sacred places where this symbol has been found.
What's
I'm going to show you some pictures here. Go ahead.
No, that's what I was going to say. I was going to say that it's found in all kinds of art, and it's everywhere and all over the world. It's just so mind blowing to me. And the times that these things are dated back to, these when these shapes and these designs show up, is at a time in the world where these places were not communicating with each other. They didn't have the ability to communicate with somebody on the other side of the planet, yet this freaking shape shows up everywhere.
Everywhere. It has been discovered in Ireland, Turkey, Greece, Israel, Germany, England, Tibet, Japan, Sweden, just everywhere, right? And again, with some of the depictions dating back to at least 6,000 years ago.
So how did 6,000 years ago, 2 places on completely opposite sides of the world come up with the same thing? Alien technology. I keep going back to that. Aliens designed gaming dice.
This is a terrible picture, but we can get to another one, which is on the temple in Egypt. We've got some in Turkey, Leonardo da Vinci. This is the Forbidden City in China. This symbol has been found the world over.
Like Leonardo DiCaprio. Leonardo da Vinci. Like he's got it figured out and messing with it, and it's just it's crazy.
Although this design is ancient, the name Flower of Life only came about when Drunvalo called it as such. That's what he nicknamed it in his book, The Ancient Secret of the Flower of Life, Volume 1, which came out in 1999. And I remember buying that when it came out. So Drunvalo believed that the symbol contains a vast akashic system of information, which I guess you could almost say is almost alien, including templates for the 5 perfect solids.
Ahmnestria, look at that center picture. Okay, now imagine that's 3-dimensional. It's not flat. It's made up of not circles but spheres, right, Mr. X?
Yes.
Right. So imagine that's actually 3-dimensional. I didn't draw it that way. Now looking at that, can you see the 5 gaming dice in there?
Yeah, I was actually like thinking that as I was staring at this.
Right. So just wait. I'm not trying to move you around, Mr. X. Just wait, because this is so crazy. Okay, go ahead.
Getting back to the 5 platonic solids that we discussed earlier, I will show you a picture of how those fit within this glyph. So from this Flower of Life pattern, you can extract what's known as Metatron's cube. These lines all draw and connect to the center points of each one of these spheres. And that's what you're seeing there. So Metatron's cube sits within the Flower of Life.
Crazy.
Each of these platonic solids also fit within that glyph. You can see with the use of straight lines how they connect and form the hexahedron, icosahedron, dodecahedron, tetrahedron, and many, many more. This is actually still actively being worked on, and new things are being discovered. They are the 5 most perfect. There are no other forms that are known within our 3-dimensional, I guess, existence.
That meet that criteria where each face is exactly the same and each line is exactly the same length. Like it's got to meet that criteria to be in those 5 platonics.
Each angle, the surface area.
Yeah, the degree of the angle, everything. Right.
Yes.
I want to play with one that's in the top middle. I want that die.
Yeah, I was about to ask, what is that one?
This one in the top middle is known as it's a star tetrahedron.
Did you see Mr. X's tattoo?
This shape is known as the Vesica Piscis.
That's where it all starts, Ahmnestria. Well, I think that's one step past where it all starts.
You know, I have a very interesting picture which I wanted to end with regards to that. This is the last slide that I'll show you guys. So yeah, this was in reference to what you were just saying before. So this symbol on the bottom left is the Vesica Piscis, and it's has a lot of meaning that people have ascribed to it. You can read about it. It's kind of a big deal, and the math involved in that simple intersecting circles that intersect each other in the center. And if they were spheres, they would combine into the center. The math behind that shows up in so much of the world that we exist within and are aware of, if that makes sense. Math is the underlying code to everything, and everything can be quantized. Yeah, it's really weird. It is the universal language, and everything is math. That is the matrix.
Yeah, and it's the universal language. Because when you start talking about people trying to communicate and speaking different languages, and it doesn't always translate or make sense, but math does. Math will always be the same thing no matter where you're from. 1 and 1 will always be 2.
Here or on an alien world, it is the same.
That's true. Thank you, aliens, for bringing us gaming dice.
The aliens gave us the math for life, and we made dice out of it.
It's pretty awesome. All right, Mr. X, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. Hopefully somebody will take this information and take a look at it. It's a very interesting deep dive.
It is. And yeah, the minute one little thing makes sense, and then the next thing makes sense, and then all of a sudden this whole giant thing starts making sense You're going to be amazed. You're going to see it everywhere you look. Ahmnestria mentioned it very early on before we started recording, and I don't know what that is, so I'm interested to learn that. And go.
Okay, so the golden ratio, it's kind of within that same shape, but there is I actually forget the numbers off the top of my head, but there's a spiral, and when you're laying out something, you lay out everything along this golden ratio, and everything always just turns out perfect.
The golden spiral, or there's a Fibonacci sequence, which is basically the golden ratio. So yes.
Okay. In your graphic art stuff, that's always in your mind. Is that constantly you're thinking about that?
Yeah. So whenever I am looking at a blank sheet of paper and I'm like, how do I lay this out to mimic that golden ratio that is a formula for life, and it's visually appealing, and I have no idea why.
I would love to send a video to Benito to explain. There's a great video on why that's visually appealing, why humans are drawn to that. It's in everything. It really is crazy how much of design from literally anything. I mean, there's so many things in this world throughout history that have used that ratio.
Okay, so thank you everybody for joining us on Go RPG Presents The Most Rad Nerd. Me, Benito Garcia, Ahmnestria. I love it when you're on the show. Mr. X.
For inviting.
So make sure you guys go back in the library and watch some of our, I don't want to say older because we do things about it every week or every couple of weeks. Make sure you go back and go through the library. There's some really good shows on there. And of course, the links will be in the descriptions. I'll have all the links from Ahmnestria's stuff with her Twitter that she's on all the time, sounds like, and her Instagram, Facebook, everything. Mr. X, I'm not even going to say anything about links because I know that you don't want to be found. So
thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
We'll take it easy, everybody. Thank you very much. Have a great night.
Night.